Okay, so today we're going to be talking about mermaids. Mermaids are my favorite mythological creatures, and I have sunk an embarrassing amount of time over the years in just researching the history of the myth, the different myths, the different versions of the myth across the world, watching videos and reading articles about different mermaid sightings. I don't believe them. I just really wish I did because it's just fun. But anyway, for whatever reason, over time, the myths of mermaids and sirens have been kind of merged together and then separated again, with all the cool elements of these myths being given to sirens and all the not so cool parts being given to mermaids. So I'm gonna make a video on it because I love these myths, and there's a lot of research. There's a lot of resources that I'll leave down in the description so that you can go into your own rabbit hole, which is just really fun to fall into. But I will condense it heavily here. We'll talk a little bit about the history of these myths, kind of detangling them a little bit, as well as a bunch of different versions of them. We'll just talk about mermaids for a little while. So with most myths, there are a million different versions of it. We can try to track down the earliest versions or the most popular versions, or we can just look at all of them and see how greatly they differ. So probably the earliest myth that we've been able to find of mermaids is of Artagatis, which was the goddess of the moon. She fell in love with a human and he died, but she was impregnated. So after she had her child, she then flung herself into the sea, I believe to drown. Some people say to become a fish. I don't know. But the gods, she was too beautiful for them to allow her to die, so they transformed her into half fish, but kept her upper half, her gorgeous self. There have been a lot of different statues and carvings and likenesses of mermaids found all over the world throughout history. Some of the earliest ones that have been uncovered, it was a carving of a mermaid found in the Durham Castle built around 1078. There have also been cave paintings found in African caves that I don't even know how far back they date, but there have been different statues and likenesses of mermaids found across the world, across history. It's a myth that has been so ingrained into so many different cultures, even though it varies in each one. Probably the most popular, as far as very old popular myths, is the one that the sister of Alexander the Great, Thessaloniki, she turned into a mermaid when she died, which is a pretty common theme in mermaid mythology. Murdered maids is what it is, and that's why they come back to hunt, kill, and destroy. Anyway, off topic. The myth goes that Alexander the Great's sister Thessaloniki, when she died, she became a mermaid, and as ships would pass, she would appear before them and ask them the same question every time: is Alexander alive? And if they responded, he lives, reigns, and conquers the world, she would calm the seas and let them pass. But if they responded in any other way, then she would cause a storm and they would die. It seems like a lot of the ancient myths of mermaids or sirens is kind of just blaming shipwrecks. Whenever there would be a storm and ships and sailors would disappear, we blame the mermaids or the sirens. So now let's talk about sirens. So like mermaids, there are a lot of different versions of this myth, but what seems to be the most popular and accepted version is that when Persephone was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, her handmaidens were given wings, either, depending on the version that you're reading, either as an ability to go searching for her to try to rescue her, or as punishment for not being able to protect her when Hades took her. But in pretty much every myth of sirens, their voice is one of the most iconic things about them, whether they are competing in competitions with famous muses, and if they lose, then their feathers are plucked, or if it's they're singing a song that lures sailors to their death. Probably the most well-known version of that is in the Odyssey. In that poem, the protagonist ties himself to the mast of a ship, and his crewmates plug their ears with wax so that when the siren song, which I believe that's the first time that phrase is used, is in the Odyssey, so that when the siren song comes, they won't be lured to their death by her song, and they are known as the only people to have been able to survive the siren's call. Over time, for whatever reason, these bird-like creatures have kind of transformed into fish-like creatures as well. And throughout history, if you look at the different myths, sirens started as bird-like creatures and then slowly just kind of became mermaids and turned into half fish as well. Even though when they were a kind of Kelpie hybrid, they were way cooler in my opinion. Why did we steal their identity and turn them into, it doesn't matter, I don't care, I do care. But anyway, so for whatever reason, over time, the myth of the siren has kind of transformed from these cool bird-like creatures into these also mermaids. The big distinction is that in pretty much every myth about sirens, their voice is an integral part of them. And with mermaids, sometimes their voice is significant and sometimes they just murder people by creating great storms that capsize ships. But a common misconception is that the difference between sirens and mermaids is that sirens sing people to their death. They lure the sailor to drown themselves by the song or lure them into the sea by their song, and mermaids fall in love with humans. And I just don't understand why it's been reduced to that. But this is not true. While yes, there are myths of mermaids that can come on land and transform into a human shape and fall in love with humans, there are myths like that out there, but they're a lot cooler than what you think they are. That is not the sole or even the most significant type of mermaid myth there is, and there are many, many mermaid myths where the mermaids use their voice to lure people to their death as well. Mermaids and sirens are two very different creatures that for whatever reason over history have kind of just been muddled into one thing, and people are confused now. Actually, let's talk about mermaids falling in love with humans for a second, because the myths around that are also really cool. There are a lot of myths around mermaids where mermaids actually remove their souls from their bodies and place it inside of an object like a comb or a mirror or a belt. And if a human, usually a man in these fairy tales and myths, if a man is able to locate where her soul is, what object it's been placed in, then he can steal it and take it on land with him. So then the mermaid is able to transform into a human to go and retrieve her object. But for as long as he has it in his possession, she has to stay with him. Oftentimes, they marry. If she's able to find her object, then she can return to the sea. If she doesn't find it, she's stuck with him. Usually these myths also accompany a curse. So usually if a man steals a mermaid's object, then he is now cursed and terrible things happen to him for the rest of his life unless that mermaid falls in love with him. If the mermaid falls in love with him, then he has extraordinarily good luck for the rest of his life. But if she doesn't fall in love with him, he's cursed for always and eternity. And if she ends up finding her object and leaving, then he's just lived years cursed with nothing to show for it. Obviously, another really popular yet more modern, using that term relatively here, version of mermaids is from Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid. If you know the Disney version, you don't know Hans's version. I feel like the real story of The Little Mermaid is such a piece of pop culture now that you probably already know that it is not what Disney did, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with taking a myth and then creating your own version of it. Retellings are a part of history, a part of life. It's saturated in our world. So Disney did nothing wrong by, turning it into a children's story. But if you haven't read the original, you really should, because it's a tragedy and it's wild. But anyway, there have also been tons of real life sightings all over the world and all over history, not just talking about different relics and myths that we've seen and heard, but no, we're actually talking about real people that said, I saw a mermaid. Some of the most notable figures that have said it, one is John Smith of Pocahontas's fame, which again, if you haven't looked into the true story of Pocahontas and John Smith, you really should, because it's just really different. But anyway, John Smith said that he saw a few mermaids on his voyage to the New World. And Christopher Columbus also was noted to have seen 3 mermaids, but John Smith was quite mystified by their beauty. Columbus was pretty put off he thought they were quite ugly. Historians tend to write that off as it was a manatee, it was a sea cow, which are now extinct, it was a dolphin. There are a lot of different, we assume it was a sea creature that we know of. Honestly, 80% of the ocean is unexplored, so it could be a sea creature that we don't know about yet. But either way, most historians say, nah, it wasn't a mermaid. I'm gonna have some articles down below that list some of the different versions of this fairy tale, of this folklore in different regions of the world, different countries. It's really cool to see how it varies, where the similarities are and how different they are. It's also one rabbit hole that you could fall down, that I do kind of regularly, is to look up different sightings across the world of mermaids. There are so many different people who claim to have seen mermaids, whether it's because one washed up on shore or if they were out at sea, either on a cruise ship or, you know, sailing, and they saw a mermaid from the distance. There are also a lot of cultures in the world that still blame mermaids for drownings in their area. People who say definitively, I have seen a mermaid in real life. It's a really fun rabbit hole to fall down. This is a myth that I love because I just think the origins are very sinister, but also so interesting. It's a myth that I love because it varies so greatly across the world, and yet it's still consistent across the world. So many different cultures have created their own version of this myth. And it's so fascinating to go back to things like cave drawings, statues, wood carvings in cultures that are completely disconnected, yet they've all found themselves believing to some capacity, in this same thing, just different versions of it. I find it so cool. I tend to obviously prefer the more classical representations of mermaids, murderous creatures trying to drown people, as opposed to the more modern version, which is a lot more romanticized. I just think myths are neat. Like I've already said a couple times in this video, there will be resources in the description. I have articles I'll be linking, I have video compilations, I have a lot of things that I just, sometimes you just want to go back to watching videos about mermaids. It's a fun rabbit hole to fall down. Give it a go. But anyway, I bring up mermaids not irregularly on my channel, and regularly am told, no, you're talking about a siren. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit in a video. I actually would love to do a series of these types of videos where we break down the origins and different types of versions of mythological creatures. Would you be interested in that? I could do one on dragons. I could do one on banshees. It would be fun. I don't know if y'all are interested in learning more about different myths, but I am. But even if you're not, I hope you enjoyed this one on mermaids. Be sure to chat with me more about it in the comments. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you again soon. Bye.